You're listening to Tabletop Arcanum, a podcast dedicated to learning and exploring the hobby of tabletop gaming. Your hosts are Justin Taylor and Richard Giese, so sit back and relax as we talk, discuss, and joke our way through the hobby we love so much. And welcome to Tabletop Arcanum. I'm Justin.
Can I start talking again, Justin? It's been like a year.
I know, but that's why we put you in the timeout corner, Ricky.
I promise not to say offensive things to different people ever again.
Well, it was more, like the Coronas. But yeah.
I will promise not to offend Corona ever again.
There we go. Welcome back, sir.
Yeah, it's been a while. I've been hiding in the background doing all the fun editing stuff, but of course, here we are, nice. 100 episodes.
100 episodes. So if you're listening to this, thank you very much for either joining the adventures that Tabletop Arcanum is, or if you've been here since episode 1. Wow. Feels like it's been a long time. Honestly, with the doing one a week now, it definitely accelerated us to 100 faster than we initially planned, but that's okay.
Yeah.
In honor of the 100th episode, I wanted to record and talk to not only myself and not just the blank void that I live in my basement, but also bring in the other two members of the Arkham Horror team that I was part of that won the championship at Arkham Knights. So the three of us tear apart and discuss all of Arkham Horror 2nd Edition, which is the game which we were challenged against and be one of our more favorite games of all time. So without further ado, first, and I'd like to welcome both Ken and Tony back to Tabletop Arcanum here. You both have been on the show prior, but this is the first time you're both on the same episode together. Why don't we remind everybody who you are and why you're here?
All right, I guess I'll go first. Hi, I'm Tony Crisco, a friend of Justin here. We do a lot of gaming together. I do listen to the show as well because it's always interesting to see the opinions that he's dropping for games I'm interested in. And once the pandemic is over, I'm going to go over and play all those games that he's been reviewing. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, that's last time I guess you guys have heard from me is when we did the Gamma episode. If you guys have listened to that, we had discussed our visit to Gamma and kind of some of our takeaways from there. So looking forward to joining the show once more. So
perfect. And Ken.
I am Ken, a longtime friend of Justin, longtime tabletop RPG player with Justin. Last time I was on was when we were doing the preview for Stargate, the tabletop RPG. So we got a chance to play that. I also am a listener of the show, and there are several board games that Justin has reviewed in the last couple of months that have piqued my interest. So once everybody's fully vaccinated, I look forward to getting together at the table with Justin and Tony to get some of those board games hashed out and see what kind of damage we can do to those, in the same vein that we've done some serious damage to the game that brings us here today.
Excellent. So directly I bring the two of you onto this particular episode because not only it's a landmark episode, but we're reviewing one of my favorite games of all time and talk about the pros and cons of Arkham Horror, the 2nd edition. And specifically it brought both Ken and Tony in because the three of us are the last remaining champions of the Arkham Horror 2nd Edition League from Fantasy Flight Games. Random humble brag?
No, it's just a straight brag.
Okay.
We're the champions, and we earned it.
Yeah, regardless, it's not like you can just walk into the manufacturer of any board game, win their league that they set up, and then get presented 2 years in a row with plaques to symbolize your dominance in their board game. So, straight brag from both of us.
Indeed.
It's been a long time. We actually found Arkham Horror pretty much back in 2005 when it first dropped, because at that time I was working at a board game store, and it was, this is a weird game. Let me buy this and go home. Employee discount aside, it was this seems interesting. So my first impressions of Arkham Horror 2nd Edition was, this is a big game that can support 8 players, looks really cool, has monsters and Cthulhu stuff on it. Let's give it a go. I had played some Fantasy Flight games at that point, but this is probably one of the earliest returns to hobbyist gaming for me was when I was working there, because I was primarily, like Ken said, an RPG player. So I was buying Dungeons and Dragons, Vampire, White Wolf products, all that stuff, and we sold board games and started getting into the hobby board gaming again at that point in 2005. So that's where I kind of remember Arkham Horror as being like this, oh, what's this thing? And taking it home and then introducing all of my friends to this insanity that I played for many, 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 many years to come. We'll kick it over in the same order. Tony, what were your first impressions of the game? What do you remember your earliest memories of Arkham Horror?
Prior to Arkham Horror, I had started with the board game wave, your Settlers of Catan, Puerto Rico, things like that. And when I saw this one come out, it had the Cthulhu mythos, which is something I was a fan of and was familiar with from the RPG world. It had a cooperative format, which was definitely something we did not have in any of our games. So when I saw it on the shelf, I picked it up and we played it and we absolutely loved it. And, that's something that sort of caught my eye, and so since then I continue to pick up all the different versions of it. The component quality for Fantasy Flight was just through the roof compared to some of their competitors, so it was just something that I naturally gravitated towards their games anyway. So that was the cherry on top, as it were. So, but yeah, I enjoyed playing it. I enjoyed the narratives that would come out of it. Definitely a game that people play differently, so different groups definitely took it in different directions, but I did really enjoy the way we played it, which was reading our character descriptions, kind of getting into the flow and then trying to role play while still trying to play optimally, of course. But we put in explanations as to why the local politician was going to pick up a shotgun and shoot a horror in the face. So.
Yeah, I actually had kind of forgotten. Like, yeah, this was that co-op feature was definitely one of those early impressions for me too. Like, that was kind of a new aspect for me in board games. So I really enjoyed not having to lose friends over a game of Risk. Ken, what were your first impressions or earliest memories of the second edition Arkham Horror?
My first introduction to Arkham Horror, I was the forever DM for my group of friends at the time. Mutual friend of ours, Justin, had picked up the board game, I think very shortly after you had. And he had convinced me to come to his house and play with 2 or 3 other people. Like, hey, it's a Call of Cthulhu game. And I'm thinking I'm showing up to play a tabletop game because, hey, somebody else is running. And when I showed up and it was this board game, I was actually disappointed that, hey, it's just a board game that's out. But then, hour and a half into that first game, I knew I was absolutely hooked. And somehow, out of our group of friends, I'm the only one who does not actually own a copy of Arkham Horror in any edition. Because every time that somebody had wanted to play it and they knew that I was a big fan of it, they would go out and buy a copy and then they would have me come over and teach them how to play. So I've never actually owned a copy, which I'm almost embarrassed to say. But as we get further into our review of the game, you might understand how I'm the lucky one for not having the monetary sink that everybody else has to this game.
Yeah, you could say that.
But yeah, it was definitely the co-op feature, which drew me in. Like, hey, this actually is kind of like an RPG in a way. We're not competing. We are trying to work collectively towards the same goal. And those early games that we were playing before we fully understand the depth of the rule book were definitely some of the learning curve, as it were some of the fondest memories I have of it. So
I want to say I joke that I didn't learn all the rules of Arkham Horror for about the first year of playing, because one of the things I still remember that we messed up so many times was spending a clue token would give you a die. But if you were in a deficit, we spent extra clue tokens to, like, oh, we're already in a -4 skill check. Well, we have to spend 4 clue tokens to get out of our hole, and a 5th clue token to actually get a chance. When once you're in the negative, a clue token was enough. It was the official. So we were burning clues like nobody's business.
We're just playing on hard mode, that's all.
Right, exactly. There was the nice rule of, like, when we learned about it, the real way it was written, it was like, oh, so we've been doing this a lot harder. Gotcha. I don't feel bad about messing it up, because we weren't making it easier for ourselves.
Yeah, we were playing a hard game on ultra hard mode because of our own ignorance, and it was kind of great.
Right. So let's start talking about the core game only. No expansions yet. What are some of the things that the core game does well? We've kind of hit it with the first impressions, but specifically, what does Arkham Horror kind of have going for it that puts it in that win category for you? Tony, you kick that one off.
Yeah, I'd have to say, thinking through it, just the replayability, sheer replayability with all the random things, the different elder gods that you can fight against, and all the different components and the way things break down and the different characters. It just had so much going for it that, whenever you play, you're not getting the same experience twice. You're definitely seeing some different things. Change even in a minor pull from the monster bag would totally transform how you approach the map and everything like that. So I really love that aspect of it. It was something you can pull out and play, and people won't get tired of it because it's just got something different every time. So I remember that was a big part of the gameplay experience, and the fact that it was difficult means that winning felt wonderful. Like if you actually won, you're all high-fiving, and you were just you were definitely up, and that really was a great experience.
Awesome. Ken, what were some of the things that Arkham does well, in your opinion?
It's not something you really talk about much in a game unless it's done terribly, so it's nice to be able to actually toot a horn for somebody who has done the dice mechanics. Was done, I think, especially at the time, was done really well, because it wasn't just, hey, roll 2 dice, move your token. It wasn't like, hey, you press the pop-o-matic trouble bubble and see what happens. It was, you're playing a unique individual. You can adjust and control your character stats, which directly affect the dice that you get to play for different skill checks and stuff. I also think that, adding the items, the item cards and stuff that your characters could, equip to add bonuses, or even just add different dice mechanics, like how huge was getting blessed early on in a game, or that late game curse where suddenly 6 only successes when you're like, super close to the Elder God waking up, or like the entire half, the southern seaboard of Arkham is just overrun with monsters. So I think the dice mechanic was the one thing that I really latched onto early in the game. Not necessarily like coming from the RPG side that I came from. It wasn't a, hey, how do I min-max this to best effect, but it was, if I am forced to have terrible stats, are the dice something that I can still work with to have a chance at success? And I don't think that any of us ever felt, even in the early days when like you said, we were playing with the clue token deficit. I don't think any of us ever thought that, hey, we don't have a chance at success on this.
Right.
Lots of profanity was thrown around over the minimalistic possibility of success, but I think that dice mechanic is one of the things that really kept me coming back to the game, because it was so simple to learn, and every playthrough is different. So
some of the things I enjoyed about it and think that it actually does well is it was one of the earliest games I know that scaled to player count really well. Whether you're playing solo or up to the max 8 players, like the difficulty of the game was scaled to the number of players, pretty balanced throughout. Core game only, there's a little bit of, like, the revised edition kind of fixed a little bit things, because when you got to like a 5th player count, it got a little funky. Other than that, it was really nice to see how the game shifted in difficulty and kind of let you go, okay, there's only 2 of you, you're only going to have so many actions. The game takes the same amount of turns, so something had to shift there. One other thing, and Tony, you mentioned it, was the high replayability, and that's one thing I latched onto very early, is it's a max 8-player game, which is already a big thing back in 2005. You had 16 investigators out of the box to play as, so even with a max player game, there was half of the possible characters sitting on the sideboard. Now, granted, that was probably by design because of the amount of times he would die or go insane and would need to grab a fresh sheet.
Yeah.
And burning through your sideboard of backup investigators was definitely a thing. The ancient ones, there was 8 ancient ones, so like even if you had a regular 4-player group, you have 4 times the amount of characters for that 4-player group. You have 8 ancient ones, or elder gods. So you had like a lot of things that could shift with just a core game experience to give you different stories. And the one thing that modern board gaming has definitely like gravitated towards this a little bit more better, but it also had, because of the co-op feature, everybody took turns kind of in the same phases. Like we all did our movement together, then we all did our encounters together, then it wasn't one player took their entire turn while everybody else sat there and watched them. The downtime was one of the things I think it handled very well, even in those higher player count games when downtime started to show up, because there was just 8 people you had to get through movement, or 8 people who had to do encounters and make tests and or do combat with. And then as we got more prolific with it, we realized where we could condense some of those things, and the game was very good about that. Like, okay, it's the movement phase, everybody do your movement. Unless there's something really crazy, priority didn't matter as much. And to be able to do a co-op game that takes a long time with a lot of players and find those places that you can condense that time period is something that I think it does very, very well. Any other positive spins? Anything else in the core game experience that you guys want to bring up?
Well, I want to mention about the ancient ones is, they do play differently. Like they do modify the game. Azathoth, he's like, if you don't do it in time, you're screwed. Your game is over. There's no fighting me because I end everything in existence, and it's so cool. Because of that, he's a little more lenient in how much you can do before you fail, right? And then some of the other ones transform what their pieces do and certain things on the map. So it was definitely interesting, and when you started to play more and more, you started to feel how different the game was with each of them. Even though it was just a minor change in terms of volume of content, it was enough to really transform the experience, and people started to say, oh yeah, we're doing an Azathoth run, this is kind of what we need to do, and go from there. So.
Yeah, and I completely agree with Tony. I was actually going to bring that up as well, because just changing out the Elder God also then affected the base monsters in the game. So when you're pulling a cultist, hey, no big deal, it's just a cultist, right? And then suddenly, like, oh no, this cultist is actually endless, and this cultist, does that, or this cultist, throw some horror at you before you even get to fight him, as opposed to just standing there and leaning into your punch like a standard cultist or maniac normally would.
Right.
So,
I'm glad you pulled up the cultist example there, Ken, because that was like the big monster they affected. One thing that we always talk about on Tabletop Arcanum is opportunities for a game. Like, where were the holes? Where were the things that could have been tightened up, or that you just did not find engaging? Again, we'll kind of lead in with Tony. What were some of the opportunities that you found with Arkham Horror 2nd Edition that may or may not have been addressed in 3rd Edition or other modern gaming?
Yeah. No, I think the biggest one is the imbalance in play experience for the players at the board. Some players are having a great experience. They're getting all the cool items. They're doing some big things. Other players, they go and they take a test, they fail, and they're stuck there for another turn. And, they're watching everybody else do cool things, get cool things. And they're stuck in town trying to do something useful and failing. So I think that's going to be one of the things that I would say was a negative experience for some players. And I know that it was a focus whenever we brought someone new to the table to try and ensure that their experience didn't feel that way, or at least give them some sort of understanding of why we enjoy the game, so that they can come back and replay it and hit that high note sometimes as well. So that's definitely the one thing I do want to highlight as a definite opportunity for the game play experience.
All right, Ken, you got one?
I do, actually. I was
after Tony called out about how we banished you to Kingsport one day.
No. Like that banishment to Kingsport was in the middle of league play, and tensions were high, and everybody knew their purpose and their role, and we laugh about it now. But man, like, you can cut the tension at that table at night.
Right.
No, and if that was my first experience with Arkham, I never would have come back. And like, I think Tony hit the nail on the head when he was describing that. But for me, actually, I think what a missed opportunity, or not necessarily a missed opportunity, but a less than optimized feature of the board is actually the terror track. Because it starts off all nice, and okay, increase the terror level here, increase the terror level there. Once you get to, what was it, like terror level 7, then suddenly monsters become endless, like monsters banished to the outskirts can just come directly into play. I never felt that through all of our experience playing that we had ever really worried or focused much on the terror track, unless it was a specific mechanic or a specific Elder God that dealt with it directly. In your base game, it was just kind of just another rule to keep track of. If we were to sit down and go over the mechanics and stuff like that, I think the terror track for me personally would have been something to take a different look at, maybe a different approach to. In general, the game has such good positive replayability for all of us, really. That's almost nitpicky, in my personal opinion, of talking about negative things of the game. But it's the one that just kind of stuck out for me, because unless everything was already going badly and then all monsters are now endless because of the terror level, like, it was never really something that factored in much to all of the games that we had played.
I can't remember off the top of my head of which levels it was, but there was like 3 thresholds within it. There was like 1, the general store closes, 1, the magic shop closes, and 1, the unique item shop closes. And every time you raised one, an ally of your ally deck left town.
Right.
But we never, like, as a group, we never relied upon allies. We never necessarily, like, the shops a little bit, yes, as you had to get your gear, you had to get your stuff, but it was never, but you hit it, Ken. Like, there's like, unless there was a mechanic actually focused on it because of the ancient one, or an expansion was dealing with it directly,
or even sometimes just
there.
An event out of the Mythos deck where it's like, oh no, like, increase the terror level for every monster in play. Like,
it's very much the truth on that. And and it could wildly differ, and you don't have much control sometimes on it, because all of a sudden buckets of monsters spawn and then your terror track is just shooting up. And so it's definitely something that wasn't as thematic as the rest of it, I think. So
now my opportunities are kind of funny, because I'm actually approaching it more as the typical game host and setup and takedown guy of the game. And this is a common complaint about Arkham Horror 2nd Edition, was the amount of fiddliness that the game actually has. The amount of tokens, the amount of decks, the amount of cards, the amount of stuff, the amount of rules that you have to track. Like, you're not only tracking the Doom track, you're tracking this terror track, you're tracking how many monsters are in the outskirts. So you have like 3 or 4 things the game board is trying to track. Not only your own characters are doing your own thing with your own health and sanity tracks and all that. That's one of the opportunities. Like, I feel, as much as I love the game for having all of these elements in it, it was almost too much in one box for a non-hobbyist board gamer to get their teeth into.
Right, yeah, it definitely did not feel like something that a casual board game fan, or just, hey, come over, let's play a board game, would ever go through as a setup if you weren't like actually a part of the hobby.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, to carry on to that, like, that was just the core game experience, and then if you add all the expansions and extra stuff that keeps padding that, by the end you have unmanageable decks and huge amounts of content that just kind of gets lost with the amount of content that's in there. So it was a double-edged sword in my having to put a lot into the box for replayability, but then I think they may have put a little too much into the box to start with, which I feel they may have learned that mistake, especially going to 3rd edition, because the 3rd edition has a slightly lower player count and only has like 4 scenarios opposed to 8 Elder Gods. While you may call it more like a nickel-diming marketing technique, by limiting that a little bit, you save some of that shock of what am I getting myself into.
Right.
So that's core game experience. Now, because this game has been out for 16 years at this point, and the last expansion came out about 10 years ago, there was a lot of extra stuff that came out over the course of 6 years of this game's lifespan, being an active supported project of Fantasy Flight. So let's dive into some of those expansions and kind of just talk about what we liked about each of them. And it's not a favorite expansion, what you didn't like about that particular one. So I know I'm going to save the final expansion as our last one, but let's just kind of go down the list as I thought of them. First up was Curse of the Dark Pharaoh. This was a small box expansion keyed in on Narthal-Hotep and his whole shenanigans in Egypt. So they added exhibit items, and patrolled neighborhoods were like the 2 main factors added into that expansion. Tony, what were your thoughts on that one?
The exhibit items were pretty interesting, but with the sheer number of cards and everything, oftentimes we never really got to see it really hit its mark. So it became one of those things we'd have to plan for it in order to fully experience the expansion. So that was one of the downsides to it. Otherwise, it really didn't impact the gameplay experience for me too much. So,
Ken, thoughts?
Yeah, I honestly, I have to agree with Tony on that one. It was like, hey, these items are mixed into the deck, or these events are popping up from the Mythos cards. So, hey, cool, there's this exhibit going on over here, or these, unique items and stuff popping up. But it was unfortunately never anything that we really focused on to like try and, hey, let's get as much of the expansion into play as possible.
Right.
It was while we are playing the game, these things are popping up, and oftentimes, again, going back to like monster surges and stuff like that, where we'd be trying to, hey, let's clear out that exhibit, or let's take a really strong look at what's going on over at this event. Monster surge happens, and then suddenly we're just back to, hey, let's just try and survive the game and not worry about it right now. So I think it, as an expansion, fantastic idea, but I think it just kind of got lost in the shuffle of the card mechanics.
Yeah, I'm not going to necessarily add anything further to this one because I think both of you kind of hit the pros and cons on it. Overall, not a bad expansion, but unless you stack the deck we'll put the Dark Pharaoh cards on top of all the decks. Shuffle those, but just put them on top of the regular decks. You're not going to see it come into play too often. So let's talk about the first big box expansion, which was Dunwich Horror. This added 8 new characters, so it brought the roster, 50% again more than the core. 4 new ancient ones. They added the injury and madness deck, so if you actually went insane or were physically incapacitated, you could, instead of taking the standard penalty, grab a card off these decks and have a broken leg, a phobia of some kind, like some sort of game mechanic as a penalty instead. And more importantly, it added the sideboard of, now you're not just in Arkham, but there's this tiny little village of Dunwich nearby that you can also visit. And guess what? It also has its own share of monsters, locations, and problems. So, Tony, what were your thoughts with Dunwich? What were the good things and bad things with that one?
Yeah, so the Madness injury decks I thought were nice. It added more flavor instead of just being hurt or just being, or just going insane. You added some additional context as to what happened. And I thought that was a nice little flavor improvement. The introduction of a sideboard was interesting, especially being the first big box expansion. It was really cool seeing the world map grow and learning some new mechanics there. We'll learn to despise that a little bit later on, but at that time it was fresh and new, and it was definitely cool. And then, getting 4 new ancient ones was just huge. So I was a real big fan of just expanding the different gameplay, because not only do you get to use it with the Dunwich Horror stuff, you could also use it with just the core box, and you had the ability to mix and match as you needed to, which was really cool. So yeah, overall I was a huge fan of it. I was excited when it came out, and I definitely picked it up immediately when I could. So
Ken, thoughts on Dunwich Horror?
My thoughts on Dunwich Horror are very sarcastic for the most part, because, yeah, great, 8 new characters. Why would you need any other characters other than Bob Jenkins anyway? I am definitely a Bob Jenkins stan, like, since day one, so let's just go from there. No, 8 characters expanding the playable roster was huge. Like no other board game at the time that I was playing. I'm not saying it's never been done, but no other game at the time that I was playing had done anything like that. So it was definitely this. We've played the hell out of the base game. Now Dunwich Horror comes out, and it really revitalized our interest in it, to where we were playing probably 2-3 games a week at one point with just the core game. And then it was like, do we want to play Arkham again? Like, I don't know, I guess maybe. And then Dunwich came out, and it was like, let's crack out Dunwich. Let's see what's going on here. Tony touched on the injury and the madness cards. I do like that mechanic, but it wasn't like the thing that really tipped the scales for me for Dunwich. For me, the sideboard itself, dealing with the fact that on top of the ancient one threatening to rise, we've now got what's in a sense a mini boss that is building slowly if you just ignore Dunwich, which bit us in the ass. I couldn't tell you how many times, because yes. Like, we're not going down to the Waitley farm, and now suddenly the Dunwich Horror is unleashed. It's like, oh my god, we all have to get down there and we all have to fight this. But yeah, I absolutely love the mechanic of the actual Dunwich Horror. Having a mini boss on top of some of the more powerful monsters that are already out in play possibilities. And I think this expansion was the first one that added unique monsters too, wasn't it? Not unique in regards to like there's only one or two of them, but like adding an expansion of monsters to the cup.
Yes.
Yeah.
That actually had like a significant increase in the monster cup, and that's just kind of the theme. The small box expansions added a few monsters and a few cards and a few things,
Right.
and the big boxes were usually that shot in the arm of like, nope, we're gonna like really increase what you're playing with.
Like here's a handful more cultists, here's a couple more of the more terrifying monsters, and by the way, this one's unique to Dunwich, so kind of stuff.
Right.
So yeah, like in general, I felt that Dunwich caused us to reevaluate how we played the game because of the sideboard and the additional locations we needed to get to.
Right.
But it was definitely not anything that took away from the base game, and I think that Dunwich only added to the things that we loved about Arkham Horror. So
I was a big fan of the Injury Madness decks myself too. I thought those were a fantastic way to change up what was just a generic penalty, because sometimes you didn't know, like, well, if I just lose all of my money, I know what I'm getting there, or I can draw this blind card and see maybe I don't lose all my money and I break an arm and I can only carry one-handed weapon. Well, I only have a one-handed weapon right now, so maybe that's not that bad. Adding the ancient ones, adding the characters was all things. As Ken, you pointed out, the Dunwich Horror itself as its own mini boss mechanic was really neat to see, and yes, definitely bit us in the ass more than once. But that's usually how most Arkham games felt. Dunwich Horror, I think, was a really, really good expansion for the first big expansion for the game. And I'm going to toggle back to small box expansion again. The biggest thing that Black Goat of the Woods added was the corruption that you could get on your character, and there was a mechanic of kind of similar to the Injury Madness, but you can get these corruption cards, and then if you get the wrong corruption cards, and game over for you. They did add a little bit of the Ancient One and some new monsters and things, but overall, what was your Black Goat of the Woods feelings? Starting again with Tony.
Honestly, I didn't really play as much with that one. I know the Heralds was a new thing, or I added another Herald, but yeah, when Black Goat of the Woods came out, when I wasn't playing with you guys, the group I played with didn't like the small box expansions as much. A lot of it because of the Curse of the Dark Pharaoh and how you never really saw it hit. It was random, and sometimes it would hurt you way too much for it because you're hunting for things that you may not ever see in the game and things like that. So yeah, I really don't have much experience with that one. I got it, and I still have it in my collection, but I don't know if we've really cracked that one myself. So.
Okay, Ken, do you have any memories of Black Goat?
Not of playing it, but I do recall going to Gen Con one year and purchasing a quote-unquote advanced copy like a week before it was released.
Right.
So we got to crack it open and take a look at the mechanics and stuff before the rest of humanity. But Black Goat honestly was one of those that just, when we added it to game, it was just another, small box expansion, shuffled it into the decks. Hey, I've never seen this item before. Oh, it is Black Goat, But so
Right.
I don't really have any strong opinion, positive or negative on it. I do know that I never felt like it was getting in the way or inconvenienced us when we played with it as an expansion. But there just wasn't enough that was like stand out or memorable to me to really, like I said, I can't really give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. It was there. It definitely added to some moments in some games, but it didn't take away anything. So.
And it's funny because I kind of echo both of you guys too in this one too, because like I was excited when we got Black Goat because we got it a little bit early, like you said, Ken, and it was like, yes, new expansion before everybody else. Let's, I was excited anytime a new Arkham Horror expansion came out because it was something new to add to the game that we already liked. But I have no actual real memories of anything out of Black Goat that was like, this was what made this expansion a thing. Let's go to another big box. A big thing that Kingsport added was another 8 investigators, another 4 ancient one, elder gods. They added the Guardians, which was a response to the Heralds that King Yellow added. Guardians was the positive recourse of like, hey, the Heralds were like a sub-boss that you could add to the game that really screwed up the mechanics and made things a lot harder. So you could also choose to add a Guardian, which gave you some bonuses and some nice things that could happen to you. The one thing I gotta say is they did a really good job throughout all these expansions, keeping it very modular. Like, if you wanted to use a Herald, you could. If you wanted to use a Guardian, you could. If you wanted to use both, you could. But never felt like, well, if you're going to play this expansion, you have to use a Guardian. But the other big thing Kingsport added was Kingsport itself, a whole nother sideboard that if you added that, then you had to go and deal with all of nastiness that was up in Kingsport. So Tony, what was your takeaways on Kingsport Horror?
Kingsport Horror was a fun sideboard. I remember the mechanics were a lot of fun to maintain and kind of visit and see some of the new encounters. But it added Rex Murphy, which I thought was one of the more interesting characters, the man who is forever cursed, investigative reporter. And it was just one of those things that demonstrated kind of what they could do with the characters, because there's only so many stat lines you can do for the characters, and once you start looking into it, you saw that there are tracks generally followed a certain theme and everything, but it was the unique rules that they added that kind of made it a fun experience and really transformed. If everything else remained the same, you choose different investigators, you have a different experience. So yeah, I was a big fan of Rex and the sideboard as well. So
awesome. Ken, what were your Kingsport experiences?
I don't recall anything ever happening in Kingsport ever. No. Well, I have a personal history of Kingsport as an expansion, and the round and time suck that it is trying to get through some of the investigator cards in Kingsport. Honestly, the thing I like most about Kingsport is at the time that it was introduced, it really, for me personally, I felt it added a small amount of role play aspect back into the game. And yeah, that a lot of that was just the way that we had approached the game and how we as a player base had always tried to get into character a little bit when we were playing. But I think Kingsport is where it really, like, with the added Guardian mechanic, it wasn't just something like, okay, we've got a Guardian on our side, blah, blah, blah. It was always, the way at least we played was, hey, if based on which Guardian was in play, we would actually play the characters a little bit, like, trying to get on the Guardian's good side or trying to uphold some values of the Guardians, depending on which one it was. Or inversely, trying to avoid the doing things that would cause the Guardian to look down on us, as we're sneaking in places and breaking down doors and making rolls that we know we shouldn't be making. So for me, Kingsport was always just more of the social aspects added to it, and I really didn't focus much on the mechanics of Kingsport so much as, hey, we've got an additional board to play with. There are new mechanics that we're trying to get through and stuff like that. But in general, Kingsport was one that I enjoyed, but I don't think it was ever an expansion that I personally said, hey, let's toss Kingsport on and see what happens today.
My personal take on Kingsport is I really did like it, and that might be because my favorite character came from Kingsport. That was Lily Chen.
Yeah. Our martial artist, yes.
And kind of like Tony, how you gravitate on Rex Murphy having a very unique mechanic of, like, well, he's always cursed and is pretty much screwed, and so why are you going to play a character that pretty much is playing handicapped the entire time? I was fascinated by the fact that Lily Chen had a fourth modifiable stat line that she could adjust her health and sanity. So, I just found that fascinating, and I loved playing with her. Ironically, my other favorite character, Trish, was also one that really messed around with your stat sliders too. So I guess that was just the mechanic I enjoyed messing around with when I played characters. So I have a little fondness for Kingsport because of one of my favorite characters coming from it. But I liked the town. I liked how it was laid out. The rifts that it had, instead of like a Kingsport monster or Dunwich monster that would show up, was a little bit different. But unlike the Dunwich Horror, I felt Kingsport's rifts were, if you're unlucky enough where the rifts actually impact your game, then you're screwed. But it was a lot of the right cards had to pop up for the rifts to actually become a problem, opposed to it's going to constantly grow into a problem. It was more stuck on random chance for that mechanic to either hinder you or just not really be a part of your game. So
yep.
I liked it, and I didn't like it for that purpose. We'll flip it back to the small box again. Now we'll hit the King in Yellow and talk a little bit about that. That added blight cards, which were negative ally, essentially like negative allies for you. The Herald cards, which was, hey, you know what's better than an ancient one with a best friend sidekick lieutenant that's going to also screw up your game. And then more importantly, it added the act cards and the King in Yellow story that was the play was going on in town, and it would advance in certain points with the Mythos deck, causing you more and more trouble as the play reached its second or possibly third act. So, Tony, why don't we talk about King in Yellow for you? How was that?
Whenever we put King of Yellow in, I always wanted the axe to go. I always wanted to see what would happen. And I think the best I ever saw, and I could be remembering incorrectly, but best I ever saw is I think we got to Act 2, and I never got to see what happened after that. So that was always something that I kind of wanted to see what would happen with it. It definitely felt more thematic, and it was definitely cool. Which is why, it came out first, and then we picked up Black Goat of the Woods, and it didn't have any of that same flavor, which is kind of why Black Goat of the Woods was more of a disappointment. But at least the King in Yellow had something we could chase after. Once we decided we wanted to get a different experience, we could be like, hey, let's see what we can do with the King in Yellow. Let's see if we can get through it, and that was a lot of fun to kind of chase through. So yeah, that was probably the thing I remember most about it. So.
All right, and Ken?
So I personally love King in Yellow. I think it is probably my favorite of all of the Arkham Horror expansions. And I think the reason for it is because while it does not have a sideboard or anything else adding to the game, and it didn't add additional playable characters or anything like that, and it really didn't change anything mechanically other than adding the Herald mechanic and the Blight cards, which even that felt more thematic to King in Yellow as opposed to a mechanic change. I think the reason I loved King in Yellow the most was because the other small box expansions were, hey, let's shuffle these cards into some decks and see what happens. Where King in Yellow had the standout of, we are now in Act 1, we are now in Act 2, we're about to get into Act 3, and in order to stop or herald in like what was coming next, you were now reliant upon getting draw cards from your decks, as opposed to sitting back and waiting for, this Mythos card is now popping this event from this expansion box, where King in Yellow was something that you were like, oh, please let it be something that we can work with, as opposed to like, oh no, this is crippling us.
Yeah, and
just an added side effect.
Yeah, and just a note for everybody, Act 3 was the end of the game, so
yes.
Sometimes you wish for that after you had a pretty bad run, but just that's an aside and not as a feature.
That's true.
That's not a bug, it's a feature.
Yes.
Right. So King in Yellow, I think I gravitated with you, Ken, a little bit more on this one. I love the act. I love the idea of the narrative of there is a play going on. We are playing throughout, trying to figure out our investigations while this plays going through in the background of the story, which is then affecting us in gameplay. If the next act begin cards show up, which added kind of that random, it was almost like a pandemic style draw from the pandemic games of I'm gonna draw this Mythic card, I hope it's not the act. Ooh, okay, good.
See, I always saw it as it was the most cinematic of the expansions that it was added, because it took us from investigators in Arkham doing your thing, and it suddenly became like we're criminals in a heist movie, and the time clock is something that we just can't control.
Yeah.
So you could literally be, at one side of the board and then have to race all the way across the board in the next round or two in order to prevent, doom from falling. And it just, like I said, it just added that extra energy to the game that some of the other expansions didn't. Sorry to jump in on there, and
Oh no, good. I like it. I was just say the one thing I didn't like about King Yellow is I never really felt the Blight cards really had a major impact on us. They existed, they would occasionally be a pain, but much like Black Goat, if it didn't show up, it didn't do anything, and I barely noticed it existed, opposed to being oh, that's a thing we have to worry about. All right, we're rounding out to the last 3 expansions. Innsmouth Horror was another big box expansion this added. This one was insane to me. It added 16 investigators, so it added the same amount that you get in the core box as brand new investigators. 8 ancient ones, the sideboard of Innsmouth, and then they also added the epic battles, which if your final conclusion with the Elder God wasn't tough enough, let's add a deck that gives you different mechanics, which honestly one of the things I enjoyed about it was, while we didn't use it in every game, if you wanted to give a fight against Yig versus a fight against Ithaqua or any of the other ancient ones a different flavor and have the final fight actually feel different, the epic battle cards are what did it, because everyone had their own unique decks with it. Tony, why don't we lead off with you? What was Innsmouth for you, and what was good or bad about it?
So Innsmouth, and we'll go ahead and focus on a character again, brings Hank Sampson into the mix.
Oh, yeah.
Hank Sampson.
Hank Sampson, the simple farmer, who's so simple that he doesn't even know he's fighting monsters at first. So he gets to ignore that first horror check because he just doesn't quite understand the insanity that he's fighting against. Such a cool thing. And he's looking for Pa, and I can't remember how many times people going, Pa, where's Pa? You know, and
Right.
So that was a cool thing that we saw with Innsmouth. The sideboard was interesting. I don't remember too much in the mechanics side of it, but I remember it was definitely fun. And of the ones when we would start doing the mix of all the different sideboards, I remember Innsmouth was generally in the running. So I just don't have too much recollection on specifics with that. But yeah, cool characters. Obviously added more cards, and just, you know, it had one of the characters you mentioned, Trish, is in this as well. So just definitely added a lot to replayability and everything like that. So the epic battles, honestly, never really got into as much. But you know, the rest of it was definitely a big thing. So.
And Ken, what about you? What was Innsmouth to you?
So Innsmouth to me, honestly, when we're reviewing, knowing that we were going to be coming on the show, Innsmouth was the one that I couldn't remember. Like, which one was Innsmouth? What did it do? My personal favorite mechanic in the entire second edition run was the personal stories that was added. And it was such, like, I never remembered where it came in, but it was, you are no longer simply playing Bob Jenkins door-to-door salesman. You are now playing Bob Jenkins door-to-door salesman. But here's the reason why you're actually in Arkham, and there is a win and a fail condition that actually both can end up benefiting you depending on what style of game you're actually running through. Like Hank Sampson, for example, is in town searching for Pa. Well, if you do things correctly and you succeed, then Hank finds what happened to Pa, and now he becomes even more formidable when fighting against monsters. But if you don't, then Hank finds out what actually happened to Pa. And now he's suddenly like hit with some melancholy as he's going into these combats. So yeah, like Innsmouth was one of those where we played Innsmouth a lot.
Yeah.
Because it's such an iconic Cthulhu location. But I had completely forgotten that the other reason that we played it so much is because of all of the mechanics that were involved in it. My least favorite mechanic of all time is in Innsmouth, and that is, and I know we go back and forth on this one, and my dislike of it is more in a humorous manner, but the epic battle system for the other ones. The reason I don't like it is because, for me personally, there is nothing more satisfying than having Bob Jenkins with a shotgun destroying Cthulhu. And when you change my ability to do that, I do not like it.
And that's fair. Yeah, and for my take on Innsmouth, I think it's funny because, like, Tony called out Trish's from here, so this, you know, and 16 new characters was always a big thing for me. Like, what? Oh, we got even more characters to play with? And, like, you know, Trish, Hank Sampson were both favorites of ours, but you got George Barnaby, the lawyer that came out of this. You have William York, the gravedigger. Like,
was Silas from this one as well?
Silas was in this one as well. Like, a lot of some of our personal favorite characters came out of this expansion. And unfortunately, on a flip side, one of the ones I love but also feels probably one of the more broken characters to play in a large group was Patrice Hathaway, who could spend her clues for other people. So it was, okay, Patrice, right. If we have 5 or more players, Patrice is going to be one of them. We're going to send her, she's going to be our clue gatherer, and everyone else is just going to use her clue pool, opposed to trying to, like, divide up. You have strategies with these characters, and, like, it was one of the things, like, if I feel like, you know, how Bob Jenkins with a shotgun was one of our go-tos, Patrice in a high count game was another one of our go-tos, because it was so critical to have that clue sharing mechanic behind her.
Right. And the Dreamer with his gate box was the third go-to in a big group game.
Now, there is something from this expansion that we didn't really see a lot of, but I thought was flavorful, just didn't really come up, was the Innsmouth look deck. Yeah. Yes. You basically had a 1 in 10 chance of having the Innsmouth look. you would basically flip a card when it tell you, or X amount of cards, and if you flipped over the one Innsmouth look card, then you're devoured, and I think it's a deep one gets spawned there because it's you now, and you get to basically create a new character. So it was a neat little mechanic, lots of flavor, but not really impactful in terms of gameplay or experience. So
yeah, the Fed's track in Innsmouth was the other thing that was like it would show up or it would not based on things going on.
Right.
And that was like, well, if the Feds show up, they lock down Innsmouth, murder all the monsters. Cool. Is this a bad thing? Kind of, if you're there when it happens.
Right.
yeah.
And and with the sideboards, you had to make like a logical choice. Like, I need to go to Innsmouth. I need to go to Kingsport. I need to, like, it was always a destination of like, I need to go there. You're not just going to go there for fun. So I felt like the Fed track never really hit home for us. We got 2 expansions left now officially. This last small box expansion, which was Lurker the Threshold. This one added the alternate gate mechanics. So instead of the standard gates, you would use these gates that would have little mechanic attachments to them. Like you might lose some health or sanity. It might move. It might spawn monsters. So it changed up that mechanic if you use those. They had the Dark Pact deck, which for the low price of something horrible happening to you in the future, you can get a boost of power now, which I will be glad to say that was a consistent thing that they kept going on in future Arkham Files games of the Dark Pact, being too good for itself and usually screwing the players over in the end. And then this one is the one where they had the relationship cards too, which I thought was a fun twist on mechanic, where they would be dealt between players, and then the players who are sharing a card between them would actually have this shared mechanic to kind of build a group or RPG style party ties to each other. Not just personal stories that you're trying to do with Bob Jenkins or whoever, but Bob Jenkins is, rivals or best friends with, William York, who's the player to his left.
Right.
So, Tony, what were your Lurker at the Threshold experiences? What was good? What was bad out of that one?
I really like the relationship side, just adding additional flavor to characters. Basically, because you're adding an additional element that isn't on the character cards, just makes it that much easier to role play that experience. So, what was it though? I'm looking at the list now. Friendly Rivals was one of the fun ones. Between you and your partner, investigator with fewer monster trophies gains +1 on combat checks, and the one with fewer gate trophies gains +1 on fight or lore checks to close gates. So it was kind of a neat thing where you're trying to balance out, because if you're tied, neither of you gain the benefit. So it's a race, and you're trying to work that out as well. But having that additional element to tie you to your people, sitting across from him on the table and everything, I thought was neat, and had that extra level of consideration that made it fun, and just changed up the experience and the stories that would be told. So the relationship cards were huge for that. So
Ken, what were your takeaways on Lurker?
I know Lurker added a bunch of new spells and stuff like that. So the Great Drake got reintroduced to our play stream at that point. Because it was like, magic is cool and all, like we can seal gates and stuff, but then I think Lurker is where it was really like, hey, let's do a deep dive into like what the magic system is, or the magic spell list and stuff actually is. The relationship mechanic was absolutely something that I think all of us enjoyed, and that was one that we would bring in even if we were just playing a base game,
right?
Just because it did add that extra level. It really revitalized some of the original intent of the game, I think, in our playthroughs and stuff. So I've while nothing truly stands out about Lurker for me, it was definitely something that when Lurker came out, it was, hey, let's get back into this. Let's play the bejesus out of this and see how it's actually changing things. And I think with Lurker, knowing that Miskatonic was on the horizon, I think with Lurker is where we started, let's replay this scenario, and that's where I think we started our playthrough of like, we'll do one expansion on this one, we'll do 2 expansions on this playthrough and stuff. And I think Lurker is what really caused us to sit down, pull the boxes out again for like the 9th or 10th time in a 7-year span.
Right.
And get ready to play, because I know that at this point we had contemplated doing the let's just put every expansion together and see what happens game. So yeah, I think Lurker, not necessarily anything specific mechanic wise other than the relationship aspects. I think Lurker was just one of those things that caused us to find our love for the game again. And so like Lurker it has positive feedback from me from that aspect, but again, it was nothing specific about it that really stood out. I couldn't tell you why I love Lurker other than the fact that it got us playing at the table again after like probably close to a year off, I think, at that point.
Possibly, yeah. Yeah, I'm going to echo the relationship cards. I think were one of the best mechanics to come out of Lurker. Because while the personal stories were really, really cool, and I'm always invested in like what is this particular investigator up to, having a shared goal between people, whether it be your business partners, whether you're friendly rivals, whether whatever that story is, having a shared mechanic between each other was something that was like, okay, so now I have a reason to really work together with someone else at the table, and not just we happen to be playing a co-op game. Like, okay, you're sitting next to me, we're business associates, let's do that. We're collectors, let's do that. Let's make sure if we're friendly rivals, what is, if I'm sitting next to Bob Jenkins, he's gonna get the monster trophies, but maybe I'll get the gate trophies, and we'll have like that shared bonus between each other. But the one thing we tried it a few times and it never clicked with us was those alternate gates. I don't know exactly what it was, but I have a feeling it was just one too many mechanics to balance and tricks with. You have all the other things going on. You have madness and injury. You have personal relationships. You have your personal plot cards. You have your relationship cards. You had all these pieces, and I think it was just near the end of all the expansions of here's yet another thing that we will have to track and figure out. Okay, this gate flip. What does that mean? What is it doing? How are we going to approach it? I think it was just at that point, it was one too many things for us to.
And I think that was actually why I kept believing Lurker introduced the gate busters, was because of the alternative gates.
Right. Now, those were the fun gates that, like, gates normally sat on a location, but not these. They're going to wander around the streets like monsters. That's the one I remember, and mechanically, if you left the space after you explored the gate, if you left the space with the gate, you would have to re-explore it before you could close it. And if the gate moved off of you had to do it anyway. So.
Yep.
Yeah. Or it would randomly suck up an investigator who was not ready to go into another world gate at any point.
Right. Well, that's the downside of playing in Arkham anyway, is you might get sucked into a gate you're not ready for.
It's true. So last expansion, and I'm going to say this is something that isn't common that doesn't necessarily happen in most expansion game lines, but this was Miskatonic Horror. It did not add a sideboard like the other big box expansions. However, it was the expansions of expansions. It added stuff for every other expansion. It added new relationship cards. It added extra blights. It added extra
new skills.
New skill cards. Like everything that was in those decks, in those other expansions, it had cards for. Most importantly, it had new encounter cards for all the expansion locations. So like when you had Dunwich Horror, you had 3 decks for the locations in Dunwich. That was all you ever saw. Or every other expansion added some new encounters for the core board locations. You never saw new Innsmouth encounters. You never saw new Dunwich encounters until Miskatonic came out. The other big thing that it came with was institutions, which was kind of a group patron sort of thing. Like, okay, are you guys working with the mob? Are you guys working for the museum? Are you guys working? And it added like kind of a group institution that you could be working towards, which was for the most part a beneficial thing. Tony, what was your take on Miskatonic, the capstone of Arkham Horror 2nd Edition?
It was interesting since we owned everything. Our experience was, we could use everything in the box. Mm-hmm. I know that was definitely one of the interesting decisions people had to make if they didn't contain control the whole entire collection, right. Because this contained parts for everything. And if you only had a select few, or you just had the core game, it definitely wasn't a value add compared to some of the other expansions for sure. But this is also the one that kind of basically you didn't know you were playing it because the cards were just introduced in it. Obviously, we remembered our favorite cards, but sometimes we get one and we're like, was that in one of the expansions in the base, or is that a Miskatonic? So it didn't really like have anything that jumped out at you, with a few exceptions. If I remember correctly, I believe it introduced cards that had dual effects. One if you were using a particular expansion or in that expansion, and then if that wasn't the case, then you would basically see something different going on. So that was I remember something along those lines. But other than that, yeah, it's something that was really cool, added a lot of flavor, and changed up your encounters. But it wasn't one that you knew, oh yeah, that's a Miskatonic horror card or things like that. It was just sort of just added to everything else. And as a result, you never played with just Miskatonic horror cards, and other than the institutions, you really didn't have much to differentiate it otherwise. So
really good summary of it. Ken, what were your thoughts on Miskatonic?
So Miskatonic, for me personally, I always had this weird relationship with Arkham Horror 2nd Edition because we never played 1st Edition. I don't think we even knew 1st Edition existed because it was 12 or 14 years before. No, it was 87. 87 was 1st Edition of Arkham Horror.
Yeah, it was pushing almost 20 years.
Yeah. So we never really had anything that was like a revision to compare to. But Miskatonic always to me felt like Arkham Horror 2nd Edition expansion 2nd Edition. It updated some mechanics, not drastically, more of an Etera type of situation, where it just laid out and clarified some rules, mechanics, and stuff that we may or may not have been choosing to ignore for half a decade. It also had that what was it, the new player reference sheet, I think, that came with it, where it was like, if you've never played Arkham before, like here's a quick and dirty rules sheet kind of a situation, which was just nice to be able to look up what book a rule we were struggling to find might have been in.
Right.
I think just the sheer number of cards that it added to the game was a value add for our group personally, because like Tony had touched on, we owned everything up to this point, so this was definitely something that we could take advantage of in every scenario that we played Arkham Horror with. And I think this was kind of not just a capstone for the product line, but this was a capstone, I think, for our player group as well, because it was, hey, this is the expansion for all of the expansions. This is like the big buy that we were looking for to get some of the other stuff updated a little bit. And it definitely was definitely something that we played the hell out of as we were getting through our checklists to make sure that we covered everything we could cover.
I think you guys are right on that. Miskatonic to me was what I needed to go back and replay with just Dunwich Horror. It made me go back and like, okay, now that we're getting fresh locations, let's see what this old first expansion actually had in it, and see what it is with a little extra boost. Because it only added expansion materials for expansions that you had, it had that. For me, I had everything. I didn't really care. Like, okay, cool, it's 100% usable. But I do know it really split the fan base of, like, if you weren't buying small box expansions because they weren't really a big impact to you, there's a good 25-30% of this box that's just useless to you.
Right.
But the price tag never changed, so do you go and get those expansions so that you could use this? Do you even get this? Was a difficult choice for some people. But I think it was a very good touchstone of how do we revitalize the entire 2nd edition game line by giving a little bit of everything back of what may have hit the cutting room floor, like, oh, this is a cool idea that we thought of after the 5th expansion that we could have used in the 1st expansion. I call that one out because that's like the Heralds showed up much later after in Dunwich, and they made a Dunwich Horror Herald card because it made a lot of sense of like, well, we already kind of have these lieutenants. That's kind of what we were using the Dunwich Horror here, but we didn't really come up with this Herald mechanic yet. So let's make a Herald sheet for him. So I really like Miskatonic for that, but it definitely only really did anything if you used it with other expansions. So best you could do is know that it existed in there and and enjoyed it. We kind of hit upon it in the process. So as we kind of talked through all the different expansions and the pros and cons of each of them, so let's go kind of with a recap here. Tony, what was your favorite expansion and why?
So yeah, I'd probably have to say Dunwich Horror. It was the first big box expansion, obviously, so it has a bigger impact on me, and I know I've played it probably more than the other big box expansions overall as a result. But the Madness Injury decks did add a little more flavor. So instead of this reliable mechanic, you had an option, and you had something that could add a little more flavor, and of course stories to your encounters and your playthrough. So I really thought that was a big thing overall. Although close second would have been Innsmouth Horror, because the characters were just so good. So many iconic characters that we still tell stories about nowadays came from that set. So, but yeah, Dunwich Horror was definitely big for me.
All right, Ken, what about you?
I'm gonna take the question in two separate ways. First, what is my favorite to play through? I think I mentioned it before that King in Yellow, I think, is my favorite expansion to play through, just because of the way it kind of changes the overall pace and setting of the game itself. You're no longer just trying to survive a Cthulhu-esque mystery that's going on in Arkham. You're now racing the clock, and it gave it that heisty feel to the game, which was something I really enjoyed, especially in a co-op game. But what I think is the best expansion from adding to the depth and richness of the game, I think I have to agree with Tony that it's either going to be was it Innsmouth or Dunwich, because those were the two that really added the investigators, added some of the mechanics that we loved, and just in general really got us playing the game again. And it's funny that I keep mentioning like getting us to play the game again, but when we recap a little bit, I'll mention why exactly we were taking 4 or 5 breaks in a 5-year span of the game. But it was definitely like value add to the game. I think Dunwich was the one that was like, hey, take a look at this. Like, we're adding an extra board to the game, and we're doing all this, take a look at what they're doing with the game, and it could be something massive going forward. So I think, player style, King in Yellow, and then just in general value add to the game, I think Dunwich is really what set us up for all of the expansions that were going to come.
My personal favorite is Innsmouth, and a lot of it is just the amount of investigators, the amount of ancient ones, just the sheer amount of new content that was added in there that wasn't necessarily new mechanics. And that was just my personal favorite thing of like, I like seeing new characters, I like seeing new ancient ones, but I didn't need a pile of mechanics attached to it. Just give me more of the things I already have, and that's why I think I gravitated towards Innsmouth a lot myself. So now let's flip it over. Least favorite expansion, Tony.
I think we kind of hit on it. Black Goat of the Woods didn't really add anything that felt special to me. So, I mean, I don't even remember much of that particular expansion. And I know I own everything, but that's the one I always second guess myself. Did I actually pick that one up? I don't remember. So that's always one, like every time I'd read through the list of expansions, just trying to remember, that was always the one that I'm like, I don't remember. Let me go double check. So.
Right. Ken?
I completely agree with Tony, because anecdotally, we have played base games where we would pull a card and be like, what the hell is that? What the hell is that symbol? Oh, Black Goat. Okay. And it just didn't really, nothing about it stood out unless we were specifically trying to play Black Goat and trying to get those new cards and stuff. So, was it worth the purchase? Yes. Was it something that added depth and stories and like war tales and stuff like that to our catalog? Not really.
And of course, in keeping suit with the two of you, Black Goat of the Woods was the most forgettable expansion, I think, too. As both things you had, like, there's nothing in Black Goat stood out of like, haha, that's from Black Goat. I remember that experience. I remember that story. Like, it just always fell flat. And when you have 8, they're not going to all be rock stars, and that's right. Okay too.
I think what best summarizes Black Goat for your listeners would be the fact that the three of us who have easily played probably 100 games of Arkham each, in doing research to prep for this podcast, could not remember what Black Goat was, even after looking it up.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
that's a little telling.
That tells more about it than pretty much anything else.
Yep.
So, in a quick thing in the last little bit here, we've talked about Arkham Horror really well, pros, cons all over, but who would you suggest Arkham Horror 2nd Edition for, and who would you say should probably just stay away from Arkham Horror? Tony, why don't you take the point on this one?
Oh yeah, anybody who hates luck in board games.
It should or should not get it.
They definitely should not get it. For those who should get it, I should say, those who like to tell or love to build stories out of gameplay elements, there's a great benefit to the way the game plays out with all the different things that happen, and because the different characters can have different results with these events, it's sometimes just a story that tells itself, and it's just endlessly entertaining. Anybody who loves a great co-op game, admittedly it is a bit long on the longer side, but it is one of the few games that supports an 8-player co-op experience without actually breaking the actual intention of the game. So that's something that can be done in a party setting, and with the exception of other massive games from Fantasy Flight, there are very few 8-player games in general. So yeah, those are the kind of people I would definitely suggest it for. And then those of you who are interested in Arkham from any of the other brand games that they put out, or in the Cthulhu mythos, it's definitely a lot of fun and a great way to explore the mythos for sure. So that's who I'd recommend it for.
Perfect. Ken, recommend for, and who would you advise to stay away?
I would advise any casual board game fan to stay away. If you just like to pick up a game and play with a couple friends, Arkham is not the game for you, just because of the amount of setup, the amount of teardown, the rules. Like the rule book itself is, I think, close to 30 pages.
And not very well organized.
Correct. So if you're just like a casual fan of like, hey, let's get together and play a game, this might not be the one for you. If, however, you are a fan of nerd culture and you like board games and you like, in-depth, games with extensive rules and stuff like that, and anything with replayability, then Arkham Horror 2nd Edition is definitely something that you should take a look at. Also, if you are in a gaming group that has that awkward 5-player level, there are a handful of board games for 5 players. However, there's only a handful of board games for 5 players. So if you've got those games and you've played them a bunch, Arkham Horror is a great alternative to that, because it steps up the difficulty when you add that 5th player. It's good, like Tony said, for up to 8. It can be soloed, as Justin and I can attest that we've played a number of solo games that are either one player playing with one investigator or one player playing with multiple investigators. It is a game that allows you to just sit back, play it at your own pace. And I think that's the other thing about the time sink in playing a round of Arkham Horror that needs to be said. If you optimize rounds and quickly blow through all of the turn orders and stuff like that, you can get through a game of Arkham Horror relatively quickly. If you want to sit back, enjoy company, enjoy the gameplay itself, and take your time playing the game, that's when you get into like the 2.5, sometimes 3-hour games. But those 2.5 to 3-hour games are probably some of the best games that we've played, because once you're invested that much time, the tension level of whether or not you're going to succeed at this point definitely adds an additional element to the game. So yeah, definitely groups of 5 who are more than casual fans of tabletop board games. And then anybody who is, just like Tony said, interested in the Cthulhu mythos and is a quote-unquote gamer, this game is definitely something you should take a look at.
Well said, both of you. I would say it's on recommended fours. Again, like Ken said, and Tony, I think you did too, with if you're a fan of mythos, if you're a fan of Cthulhu, it's definitely heavily thematic. If you're someone who likes to build the story of your characters and not just have like, this is what's happening to you, but try to chain what all these random events are doing to your story, and you like to have that creative drawing the string between all of your events, it's really good to do that. It won't naturally do that for you. Sometimes the events will play out in such a way where it's like, nope, that is the story. This is what happened to that poor soul. The luck part of it and the fiddliness part of it are definitely things that if you're not comfortable with board games that have those elements, this will be an overwhelming experience that you will not enjoy. And for better or for worse, if you're a player who really doesn't care too much about the flavor text or the narrative elements behind the game, I feel second edition is going to fall flat for you. If you just go, okay, what's happening? Make a strength test. Okay, fight this monster. What are you doing? You're making a strength test at a -2, and you're just blowing through the things mechanically. It loses a lot of what we love about the game. And I think if that's your approach to board games, there are better choices for you than Arkham Horror at that point. Overall, as you can tell throughout this entire discussion, we love Arkham Horror. We can't pretty much recommend it enough, but it has its hang-ups and its lovable flaws in our opinion.
Yeah, and I think that's a caveat that I think needs to be mentioned. That's for our extensive love and almost fanboy level of appreciation for this game. I think all three of us are able to sit down and recognize, like, this is a flaw, based on the player group you're playing with. This is a flaw. So it's not that we have this, like, hey, this is the best game ever. This is just a game that the three of us truly love for the reasons we've stated. But yeah, like, we are aware that the game has many flaws and mechanical issues.
Last thing, I want to say thank you to both Ken and Tony for joining me in this discussion and kind of getting the band back together, if you will, to talk about Arkham Horror 2nd Edition. But if either of you have anything going on that you wish to let my listeners know about, feel free. We'll let Tony go first, as he is, as we declared, first citizen of Arkham.
First citizen Tony.
Yes. So thank you again for having us on. This was great. Just reliving the glory days of our Arkham Horror 2nd Edition, and just remembering the game. Now I've got this strong urge to play it, so we're gonna have to figure that out at some point
soon.
But
yes.
Yeah, no. If any of you are interested, I do have a YouTube channel, which I do with 3 other gentlemen. We're putting up Let's Plays and things like that of games that we really enjoy. So if you're interested, we're called Breaking the Stream. So definitely check us out on YouTube. Drop us a like, subscribe, and check out some of our content as well. So we're a growing channel, and we're looking forward to seeing some new faces into our streams. So
excellent. And Ken.
And before I make my terrible plug, Justin, how many total investigators are there in all of the expansions of Arkham 2nd Ed?
If my memory serves me right, 52.
And it can be stated that Justin and I, Tony's covered a bunch of them, but Justin and I have each played at least one successful, not just one game, but one successful game with all 52 of them. So if anybody is, wanting to know how many games we've actually played, that's easily over 150 games that Justin and I have played together. Like, that's just the two of us together.
Yes.
It was a great trick to get him to stop playing Bob Jenkins, because we got a checklist. Let's get some new people.
And I think for a while, wasn't it that in that particular instance was like, when are you going to use your Bob Jenkins card?
Yes. It was
like, oh man, I can only play him once in 52 games, so when is it going to be?
No, but I also have a YouTube channel. It is Top Shelf Goblins. I'm also streaming live retro JRPGs on Facebook, also under the Top Shelf Goblins moniker. I just completed recently, this was a playlist for the original Final Fantasy, but I did the Dawn of Souls version. My Final Fantasy playthroughs I'm referring to as Final Fantasy on easy mode. I'm playing the easiest possible versions of the United States releases, Final Fantasies 1, 2, and 3. And I'm breaking up that with some either like Nuzlocke runs for Pokemon games and some JRPGs that people might not have gotten to experience, like the Lunar Eternal Blue and Lunar Silver Star. the original Sega CD versions, not the PlayStation versions. But yeah, and in the future, Tony and I are actually going to be collaborating on stuff for Top Shelf Goblins, where we're going to be doing. We're not going to be broadcasting playthroughs of Blood Bowl and some of the Games Workshop games, but we're going to do recap shows of the fun that we have at the table. More of a satirical Sports Center style show. So hopefully that'll be dropping before 2025. But once we'll figure out like what the schedule looks like once things clear up.
There you have it. You can find both of them at their respective YouTube channels or on the Book of Faces. And again, I appreciate both of you for sitting down and talking about this. And we will definitely be pulling this out either digitally or physically in the very near future, because now I think all of us have that nostalgia itch that we have to play at least one more game of 2nd edition.
If nothing else, just to remember what the hell was Black Goat in the Woods.
The first game will be just pure Black Goat, nothing else. So again, thank you both, and we will be chatting soon.
All right, so that was our talk of Arkham. I don't know if you heard me in there. I was the one breathing heavily in the corner. So, yeah.
Contribute to that BGM.
Yeah, oh yeah.
All right, and well, it was a long discussion, but it was really nice to go through all the different expansions, pick out some of our favorite moments and favorite things, and then try to remember what the hell Black Goat of the Woods was all about anyway. You may have noticed with episode 99 that we did a review of Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, and we've done a couple RPG books in the recent, and we're going to mix that up a little bit more. One of the big things that Ricky and I are talking about here is kind of mixing up and formatting a month into, we're going to get an RPG review in it, a couple board game reviews, and interviews when we can land guests.
Yeah, and hopefully you'll start hearing from me again. Things are
Soon.
Hopefully going back to normal. Start seeing the light at the end of the tunnel.
Indeed. And then, more and more games will be coming out. We might have a little bit of a lull, so I know one of the big plans is with the board games have tried to do some new content and like the new hotness, as well as like some throwback episodes like we've been doing to the Arkham Files or other games that have been around that maybe dust some of that dust off and talk about them again. If we really get desperate, Ricky will go to Goodwill and find whatever is on the shelf and talk about it for an hour.
Well, you'd actually be surprised. I have a few of them that I picked up.
I am not surprised.
I would love to have throwback series of, because these are some very bizarre games that I found.
Is it Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the board game from the cartoon?
No, Home Improvement, the board game.
Oh.
I've also found a beer run game. I found quite a few little odds and ends that are terrible games, and they were just made to cash in on either IP or that someone was dumb enough like me to buy them.
Well, hopefully you didn't pay sticker price for them, but if you did, well, they got you. As always, from the bottom of our hearts to you, thank you for listening. It's been 100 episodes, and here's to another 100.
Here's to another 100. Also, make sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. We're going to make sure to keep bringing you stuff every week. It's going to only grow from here, which is fantastic. Mm-hmm. Congratulations to you, Justin, on 100. Congratulations to us.
Yes, sir.
It's been a fun few years here.
Yes, and 2 further years. So until next time, happy gaming.
Happy gaming.
You've been listening to Tabletop Arcanum, produced by Justin Taylor. This episode was hosted by Justin Taylor and Richard Giese. Mixing and editing by Richard Giese. Original theme by Paul Moore and Issac Gilbert. Check the description for this episode's featured background music. You can follow us on most social media platforms. Be sure to like, subscribe, and follow, and leave us a review if you would. As always, thanks for listening.